Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. Today, we have episode 2 of the Westies. All right, I got a lot of information to cover here, so we're just going to jump right into it. In February of 1978, Jimmy Coonan and Mickey Featherstone were in a car on their way to Tommaso's restaurant in Brooklyn. Not much was said during the ride. Everything they had to say, they said back in Hell's Kitchen. When they were sent for by Paul Castellano, they knew they had no choice but to go. Not to would be the end of them both. But they had made plans to ensure that if they didn't come out of that meeting alive, no one would. First, Jimmy sent his niece Alberta Sachs and her boyfriend to Tommaso's with money and instructions. Get a table, order a big meal, and observe. If anything looked funny to them, call Mickey's apartment. Next, Jimmy told his guys that if they didn't hear from him and Mickey in 2 hours, they were to bust into the Vets and Friends social club right next to Tommaso's and kill everyone inside. Then Jimmy laid out the gang's arsenal. He took 2 guns, placed one in his crotch and one in the small of his back. Mickey did the same. When they arrived at Tommaso's, they took seats at the bar. A few minutes later, Roy DeMeo comes out of a back room. "All right, they're ready for you," Roy said. "Listen, they're going to ask you about Ruby Stein. You don't know nothing about that. And you don't know nothing about his black book either, because they're going to ask you about that too." Jimmy nodded. Roy led them to the back of the restaurant through a door that was closed to the public. Inside that room, seated at a long table, was some of the most powerful gangsters in America. Seated at the head of the table was Paul Castellano, the boss of the Gambinos for a little over a year at this point. Next to him at the table was Funzi Thierry, one of the rotating bosses of the Genovese family during the 1970s. On Paul's other side sat Agnello Della Croce, Uncle Neil. He was the family's underboss. Della Croce made his bones in the 50s when he was part of Albert Anastasia's crew. Albert always needed someone killed, and he kept his guys very busy. Also at the table was Carmine Lombardozzi, one of the family's top earners, another old-timer who was present and arrested at the Appalachian meeting in 1957. Joe M. Gallo, the family's consigliere, Capo Nino Gaggi, and Roy DeMeo. Jimmy and Mickey were introduced to everyone at the table before a procession of food came pouring out of the kitchen. After they were finished, Paul Castellano cleared his throat and the room fell silent. Paul told Jimmy and Mickey that he wanted them to partner up with the Gambino family. This would mean Jimmy could use the Gambino name in their street dealings. All they wanted was 10%. But there was one thing, Paul said. Did you or any of your guys have anything to do with what happened to Ruby Stein? Jimmy said, "No, I have no idea what happened to him." "What about his black book?" Paul asked. "Again, Mr. Castellano, I don't know what you guys are talking about." Funzi Thierry frowned his hard face and said, "Didn't you and your guys owe him a lot of money?" "Yes, but as far as I know, everything was paid back before he disappeared." Again, Paul cleared his throat. "Okay, from now on, you guys are with us. That means you got to keep a lower profile. No more cowboy moves. If anybody needs to go, you need to get my permission first. No exceptions. If you get called to Brooklyn, you have to show. No exceptions. And you can't bring any weapons. No weapons to a meeting." After this, more wise guys were allowed into the room, followed by more food. Jimmy and Mickey socialized, ate and drank, unaware of the time. "Oh shit, Jimmy, it's been over 2 hours. We got to get to a phone." Jimmy and Mickey began to say their goodbyes and made their way to a phone. Back in Hell's Kitchen, Jackie Coonan answered the phone. "Where the hell you been?" Mickey said. "Where the hell you been?" said Jackie. "No, where the hell you been?" snarled Mickey before Jimmy snatched the phone out of his hand. "Where the hell you been?" Jimmy said. "We thought we'd give you guys more time." "Shut up," said Jimmy. "Listen, get everyone together. We're headed back." Jimmy was now big time. A few days later, he told Mickey that he would be getting a piece of the bookmaking rackets and the unions, and he would be paid $200 a week for driving Jimmy around. This was good money for Mickey. $400 to $500 a week was more than he ever made, but he was still living in public housing at 520 West 56th Street with his new wife, Sissy, and their newborn son. Meanwhile, Jimmy was having a house built in New Jersey, and he and his wife, Edna, drove brand new cars. Sissy made a fuss about it and thought that Jimmy was using Mickey to make loads of money and not giving him his fair share, but Mickey was blinded by loyalty. So many people went missing in Hell's Kitchen that the police began to take notice. When a homicide detective received the tip that all the bodies could be found, including that of Patty Dugan, in an unused section of the New York subway system, the detective got permission to bring in a construction team to dig up the tracks. After digging for a while, a few bones were found and taken to be tested, but they turned out to be animal bones. But the police had Jimmy and Mickey on their radar, and they began to keep an eye on them. But they had no idea that Jimmy was making people do the Houdini, or he had a van that he nicknamed the Meat Wagon, equipped with all the tools he needed to take his magic show on the road. Things were going well. Jimmy was meeting with the Gambinos so much their ways began to rub off on him, and his gang began to notice. Soon they thought that Jimmy was trying to be like the Italians. Mickey didn't trust him, and he told Jimmy not to trust him either. His hunches would be justified in the fall of '78. Danny Grillo owed Jimmy a lot of money, and he wanted to clear his debt. So he told Jimmy he needed help with bumping someone off. He took Jimmy to a garage where he could find the guy and gave him a gun. But Jimmy smelled a rat. He went around the corner and saw a car full of Danny's guys. He popped the clip out of the gun Danny gave him, and it was empty. Son of a bitch. He tossed the gun in the gutter and went back to Hell's Kitchen. "I told you so," said Mickey. Jimmy was pissed. He wanted to kill Danny Grillo. He was going to kill Danny Grillo. The only question was he going to ask permission or not? He ultimately decided against letting Roy DeMeo know. For weeks, Jimmy, Mickey, and the gang rode around Brooklyn in a meat wagon looking for Danny Grillo without any luck. After a few days, Jimmy was having one of his meetings with Roy DeMeo. Jimmy made a probe about Danny, and Roy said that Danny was gone, permanently. Roy said that Danny had stolen money from the crew's stash at the Gemini and lost in gambling and up his nose. Danny was taken out in Roy's House of Horrors, an apartment right behind the Gemini Lounge in Brooklyn. They parked his car on a bridge with the driver's door open to make it seem like he got depressed and took a dive. When Jimmy told Roy what Danny had done to him, Roy said, "Why didn't you come to me?" "I don't know," Jimmy said. Mickey started to become a real gangster, not just Jimmy's insane partner. He began to dress better and even branched out on his own. He hooked up with a man named Billy Comas and began to move counterfeit $100 bills. One night in September, Jimmy and Mickey went out on the town, and they ended up at a massage parlor around 3 a.m. When all their tensions were relieved, they paid with 3 of Mickey's $100 bills and left. But in their haste to get massages, Jimmy parked his Cadillac in the tollway zone, and it was now in the impound lot. The next morning, one of the women from the massage parlor was arrested at the bank for trying to deposit the bad notes. A Secret Service agent was called, and after talking to the masseuse and her boss, the agents found that 2 men, one named Jimmy and one named Mickey, gave him the bills. When the agents found out that Jimmy's car was impounded, he headed over to the impound lot, just in time to find Tony Lucic trying to get the car. He found Jimmy's keys on Lucic and found a loaded gun in the trunk. Jimmy pulled up not much later and was arrested. Jimmy said he didn't have his car the night before, but was taken in after another gun was found in the car that he came in. Jimmy and Tony posted bond and were out on the same day. William Murtha, whose kitchen Jimmy was found in 1966, was now big into construction, and a union rep was giving him a hard time. Murtha asked for Jimmy's help in taking the guy out, and he offered Jimmy 10 grand for the job. Jimmy agreed to do the hit, but this guy turned out to be harder to kill than they thought. They stalked him for months with no luck. On November 22nd, 1978, after another day of hunting a rep in the meat wagon, Jimmy Coonan, Mickey Featherstone, and Jimmy McElroy retired to the Plaka Bar in the Opera Hotel on Broadway to unwind. After a few drinks, Bobby Huggett, Jimmy's old pal from '66 who was back from being on the lam, came into the bar with John Crowell, Billy Comas, and a man named Harold Whitey Whitehead. Whitehead was in jail along with Comas and Crowley, and he used to hang out at Jimmy's 596 Club until he got into it with Muggsy River, so Jimmy was familiar with him. Jimmy went over to speak with them, and after a few drinks, he came back with a look Mickey knew all too well. Jimmy was ready to kill. "What's wrong, Jimmy?" "Mickey, the guy called Muggsy up." "Screw him. He's always been a loudmouth," Mickey said. Huggard, Crowell, Comas, and Whitehead went to the bathroom, which was located in the basement of the hotel, to smoke a joint. Jimmy sat at the table for a few minutes stewing before he too went downstairs. Jimmy walked past the 4 men and went to the urinal. He flushed the toilet and turned around with his hand still by his crotch. In one swift move, Jimmy stepped forward and put a .25 automatic behind Whitey's head, and shots rang out. Whitey's face went blank and he dropped to the floor. Comas, Huggett, and Crowell stood in shock for a moment before almost falling over each other trying to get out of the bathroom. They ran into Mickey and McElroy, who were just coming downstairs when Jimmy fired. They heard 2 more shots before Mickey and Jimmy McElroy came in and saw Jimmy standing over Whitey Whitehead's body. This was not good. Jimmy had become one of those killers who planned everything out and left little or no evidence. Now he had just let his emotions get the best of him. They stood around for a second trying to come up with a plan. Soon, one of them said, "We can take him out back and dump him in the alley." The men grabbed Whitey by the arms and legs and began to carry him through the basement of the hotel. When they got to the door leading to the alley, they heard someone calling for help. The man had gone out of the wrong exit and was now stuck between the locked gate and the door that automatically closed behind him. Jimmy decided to just leave the body there and take off. The next morning, a bloody trail from the bathroom led to the discovery of Whitey Whitehead's body. His pants were ripped and around his ankles, and his pockets had been pulled out to make it look like a robbery. But the cops also found a greeting card left next to the body. Over the next few weeks, the NYPD was trying to find a Bobby whose name the greeting card was addressed to with no luck. But the Secret Service had a lead they thought would lead them to Coonan and Featherstone. The Secret Service, along with the NYPD, put together a sting operation. They used an undercover agent to get close to Ray Stein, the boyfriend of Jimmy's niece, Alberta Sachs. Ray and Alberta were helping Mickey move the bad bills that he and Billy Comas got from some Greek gangsters in New Jersey. Ray was still a teen and bragged to anyone with ears about him being connected with Jimmy and Mickey. The undercover officer gained Ray's trust by buying a few notes and a silencer. Ray also let him know that he had access to nose candy too, if he was into that. The agent made a deal to purchase $50,000 worth of bad bills for 27 cents on the dollar. Mickey smelled a rat and told Ray that the man he was dealing with was a cop. Mickey and Jimmy McElroy ran a trace on a license plate of the undercover agent, and the plates came back as stolen. Mickey told Ray that only a fool would ride around with guns and counterfeit money in a stolen car, a fool or the cops. Ray refused to listen and insisted that his guy was okay, but he was wrong. They had already gotten warrants to bug his and Mickey's phones. In February 1979, Mickey brought a bag containing $50,000 worth of counterfeit bills to a Hell's Kitchen candy store. Mickey handed the bag to Ray, and Ray went out to meet with the undercover officer to complete the transaction. Ray got in the car and they pulled off. On 11th Street, Ray gave the envelope to the agent, and moments later, more agents swarmed the car and Ray was arrested. A few minutes later, the street in front of the candy store was filled with undercover cops. Mickey saw them coming and ran back into the store. He tossed the gun he had in his waistband across the room right before the cops busted in. The cops lined Mickey and everyone else in the store against the wall. They seized the gun but could not connect it to anyone. After a thorough search, they didn't find any counterfeit plates or nose candy. The police took everyone's name and let them go. At the same time, another group of cops were busting down the door to Mickey's apartment. They found Sissy, 18-month-old Mickey Jr., and Billy Comas. They found a shotgun, a .25 automatic handgun, and a few bulletproof vests, but no plates or candy. Billy Comas was arrested. At the station, Ray Stein was trying to stick to the code. He said that Mickey had nothing to do with his counterfeit operation, and he was just using his name to make himself seem more important. The cops showed Ray the wiretap transcripts, and with all the evidence they had against him, he was looking at 50 years. Ray broke. He asked to speak with Alberta. She was brought down to the station, and the couple were left alone in the interrogation room. After a few minutes, they told the cops that they would both cooperate. Down the hall, Billy Comas was talking to the cops, but he was not willing to talk about Jimmy or Mickey. But he did reveal his source for the counterfeit bills. He was looking at some hard time for violating parole. Even worse for Billy was the fact that the police were now looking at him in regards to the Whitey Whitehead murder. Witnesses placed him at the Blocker Bar with Whitehead the night he was killed. It wasn't looking good for Billy, and he too cracked. Ray Stein refused to be represented by the Westies lawyer, and word got back to Mickey that Ray had flipped. On March 9th, Mickey Featherstone was arrested and charged with the murder of Whitey Whitehead. The gun found in his apartment was matched to bullet casings left at the scene. Billy McElroy was supposed to have flushed them, but one was found behind the toilet. A few weeks later, Jimmy was arrested at his home in New Jersey and charged for the same thing. In April of '79, jury selection began. Jimmy and Mickey would be tried together. The government would try to prove that Jimmy and Mickey murdered Whitehead because he refused to pay the extortion money they were demanding. Their witnesses were to be Billy Comas and John Crowley. But the night before Comas, a lifelong criminal, was to testify before a grand jury. He decided that he would rather die than be labeled a rat. So he put a pistol to his temple and removed himself from the equation. Crowley took the stand on December 14, 1979. For 2 hours, John Crowley stood on the stand, too scared to say anything, until the judge cleared the gallery. And then John Crowley testified that on the evening of November 22, 1978, he witnessed Jimmy yank a pistol from his crotch and shoot Whitey Whitehead in the back of the head in the bathroom of the Blocker Bar. When the grand jury brought Bobby Huggett in to testify, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. He would later say that he had not seen Mickey or Jimmy on the night of the shooting. Bobby Huggett was charged with perjury and locked up. In December, the jury sent a note to the judge asking where is Huggett. Neither the defense nor the prosecution had called Bobby, so the judge called him to the stand. Under oath, Bobby again said that he had not seen the pair on the night of the shooting. And then he said that it was recently deceased Billy Comas who killed Whitehead that night. Bobby said that Comas told him he killed Whitehead because Whitey shot a friend of his during a robbery. Bobby, placing the blame on the dead man, sealed the deal. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and returned a verdict of not guilty. But Jimmy and Mickey were not off the hook. They were still facing counterfeit charges. And then the DA charged Mickey Featherstone with the Mickey Spillane murder. Ray Stein took the stand against Mickey and told the jury that Mickey killed Mickey, but Mickey was acquitted of that too. In December of 1980, Mickey Featherstone took a plea for the counterfeiting charge and received a 5-year sentence. The police dropped the counterfeiting charge against Jimmy Coonan, but he was charged with the gun they found in his car, and he too took a 5-year deal. While Jimmy was away, his power didn't wane. In fact, it got stronger. He was able to get control over the local Teamsters and was getting kickbacks from the ILA. Edna Coonan, Jimmy's wife, would make his pickups while he was away. Sometimes she brought along Billy McElroy, who himself had beaten a murder rap in 1980 after he killed a stagehand during a drunken binge, and sometimes she would bring Sissy Featherstone. Sissy wasn't a fan of Edna. To her, Edna was a big fake, and she didn't like how she talked to her like she was the help or bragged about her big new house. Some of Jimmy's guys like Kevin Kelly, Tommy Collins, and Jimmy McElroy began to sell a lot of nose candy, and Jimmy got his cut. It wasn't the same for Mickey. People who owed Mickey, well, they ducked Sissy, and she had to go get a job to support herself and her 2 kids. In August of 1983, Mickey Featherstone was released. He met with Jimmy before he left, and Jimmy thanked him for standing by him and told him that when he hit the streets, there would be 50 grand waiting for him. Mickey got home and was welcomed by the neighborhood. He asked around, but no 50 grand. While during this time, Mickey had become a changed man. He had a chance to clear his mind and take a hard look at himself. Mickey decided that he was done with the rackets. He planned on getting a union job and staying out of the streets. Mickey and Sissy went looking for a home in New Jersey, and they found one they liked in Teaneck. All they needed was $5,000 for the down payment. Mickey went to Edna Coonan and asked her to get in touch with Jimmy and see if it was okay for him to borrow 40 grand. A week later, Mickey got word through the Hell's Kitchen grapevine that Jimmy's answer was no. Mickey didn't understand. Jimmy told him there would be 50 grand waiting on him, and now he couldn't even borrow 40 grand. A few weeks later, the Featherstones attended a party for Jimmy's son. Edna pulled Mickey to the side and told him that Jimmy would turn over the Piers to him if he got rid of 3 people for him. Mickey declined the offer. Well, Edna said, you know I'm going to have to tell Jimmy about this, and this is going to get done with or without you. Mickey shrugged and returned to Sissy at the table. Mickey got a job at the Erie Transfer Garage. Now, they loaned cars to movie sets and were part of the Teamsters Local 817. On February 11th, 1984, one of the men on Jimmy's list, Vincent Leone, was found dead in his car in Gutenberg, New Jersey, of multiple gunshots to the head. Leone was a longshoreman's union official, and he was partners in a loan sharking operation on the pier with Jimmy, and Jimmy felt like he was not giving him his proper share. Things were getting done with or without Mickey. One night, a few days later, Mickey was with Jimmy McElroy and Kevin Kelly. When the Leone murder came up, Kelly and McElroy admitted that they were the ones who took care of Leone and that Kelly was the shooter. Mickey asked about the Piers. Jimmy McElroy said Jimmy said that it was all theirs as long as Mickey was involved. Now, when he first got home, Mickey wanted to start a new life. But now he was back in Hell's Kitchen, back in his element, which meant back to drinking and doing nose candy. He figured that if he didn't go along, he would be next on Jimmy's list. So Mickey, Jimmy McElroy, and Kevin Kelly began to get the Piers in line. Anyone who had a problem was threatened or killed. Sometimes, just Mickey's presence at a meeting made tears well up in the eyes of grown men. Mickey was now receiving $1,100 a week from the International Longshoremen's Association. But when Jimmy came home, everyone's shares decreased. This sparked resentment, but no one complained, or at least out loud. Jimmy rekindled his relationship with the Gambinos. Danny Marino was now his contact. Roy DeMeo had been shotgunned to death and stuffed into his own car and left to rot while Jimmy was away. To some of the rank and file, Jimmy was different now. He spent more and more time with the Italians and began to talk and dress like them. Mickey and a small faction of the Westies began to think that Jimmy wasn't being loyal to the neighborhood. The drugs and alcohol made Mickey's paranoia return, and he began to think that Jimmy was planning to kill him. So Mickey began to work on a plan to beat him to the punch. At 2:30 p.m. on April 25, 1985, Michael Holley, a Carpenters Union official, was walking in front of the Jacob Javits Center. Behind him, a man hopped out of a tan Ford Tempo wearing a windbreaker with the hood covering his face, but not his dirty blonde hair. He walked towards Holley. In his right hand, he had a .25 caliber automatic. In the other, he had a silencer. He screwed the silencer into the pistol and took aim at Holley. Holley didn't hear the shots, but he damn sure felt them. Holley ducked and tried to run, but the man in the windbreaker fired 5 times, hitting him with all 5 shots. Holley lay dying in the street. The shooter then hopped back into the tan Ford Tempo and took off. The license plate number was taken down by a witness, and it was traced to the Erie Transfer Company. The next day, Mickey was arrested and charged with the murder of Michael Holley. He was brought out in a police lineup, and witnesses identified him as the shooter. 1 month later, Mickey was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 25 years. Mickey Featherstone went off to do his time. End of story. But not really. You see, Mickey had done a lot of things wrong in his life, but he was innocent this time. He knew he didn't shoot Michael Holley, because back on April 25th, 1985, when Holley was killed, Mickey was in New Jersey about to pick up his daughter from school. Up in New York, Kevin Kelly, Kenneth Shannon, and a young member named Billy Boken were in a tan Ford Tempo they borrowed from the Erie Transfer. Billy Boken was wearing a blonde wig and a fake mustache. The description given to police by witnesses sounded like one person, Mickey Featherstone. Later that day, Mickey was at the Erie Transfer when the police came in and asked him where he had been and was this his Ford Tempo. The officer pointed to a car with the same license plate number witnesses recorded at the scene of the Holley shooting. After his conviction, Mickey began to realize that he had been set up to take the fall, and Jimmy Coonan was the only person who could make that happen. But why would Jimmy do that? He had been loyal. They had not. Mickey knew of the plan to kill Holley, but was not part of the planning. Holley was killed because in 1977, Billy Boken's brother John and Holley got into a fight in the bar. John Boken pulled a gun and shot Holley in the leg and was blown away by an off-duty cop who happened to be at the bar. The Westies always blamed Holley for John Boken's death, and Billy Boken got the okay to hit him once Jimmy got back. In the summer of '86, Mickey was in his cell waiting for sentencing, thinking, why would Billy dress up like that? And why wouldn't they give him notice so he could have an alibi? But in his heart, he knew why. Mickey had had enough, and he reached out to the feds. Mickey began to spill the beans on the Westies operation, the loan sharking, the unions, the bookmaking, the arrangement with the Gambinos, and the murders. Lots of murders. Sissy met with FBI agents and agreed to wear a wire. She met with Billy Boken, Jimmy McElroy, and Kevin Kelly. When she asked Billy why he had chosen to wear a disguise that made him look like Mickey, he said that Kevin Kelly and Jimmy Coonan told him to do so. Kevin Kelly was charged with the Vinnie Leone murder, but went on a lam. Jimmy McElroy was arrested for the killing of Walter Riley in 1981, a low-level member of the gang. Billy Boken was not charged with the Holley murder because he was already locked up for fatally stabbing a man in a barroom fight. Jimmy Coonan was arrested in his home in Hazlitt, New Jersey in November 1986 and charged for luring Patty Dugan to an apartment, shooting him, dismembering him, and dumping his body in the East River in 1975. On December 18th, Edna Coonan was arrested and charged with planning the death of Vinnie Leone. In September, Mickey's conviction would be overturned after the judge found out that Mickey's own lawyer in the case knew Billy Boken killed Holley, but did not reveal that to the court because they were also defending Boken. In March of '87, Jimmy, along with his wife Edna, Muggsy Ritter, James McElroy, John Halo, Tommy Collins, and his wife Florence will be hit with federal racketeering charges for loan sharking, bookmaking, counterfeiting, drug dealing, kidnapping, extortion, murder, murder for hire, insurance fraud, and an attempted murder charge stemming from a 1986 shooting of Carpenters Union President John Connor. Connor was shot 5 times in the ass as a favor to the new boss of the Gambino family, John Gotti. In case you've been under a rock, in December of 1985, Paul Castellano had a dinner meeting at Sparks Steakhouse that didn't end well for him, or his underboss Tommy Bellotti. But John Connor was no saint. In fact, he was under indictment for extortion at the time the trial started. Gotti wanted him dead because he erected one of his associates' restaurants in a shakedown attempt. The Westies were supposed to shoot him in the kneecaps, but the shots went high. Mickey would plead guilty to the racketeering charges and be placed in a witness protection program. When the trial started, he would be the star witness against his former associates. Former member Billy Beatty also took the stand. Billy had been gone for a few years after ducking a murder contract given to him by Jimmy Coonan. When Billy returned to the neighborhood, Jimmy put a contract out on him. He was one of the 3 on the list, along with Vinnie Leone, that Edna gave to Mickey. Beatty testified that Danny Grillo shot Ruby Stein and Jimmy dismembered the body. Alberta Sachs, Jimmy's niece, told the jury about the night in 1975 when her Uncle Jimmy and Eddie Comiskey came to her door asking her for kitchen knives. A half an hour later, they returned with a garbage bag that was dripping blood. "What's that?" she said. "It's Patty Dugan's head." She was told to clean up the blood, and then her uncle and Comiskey went downstairs to the furnace. She also told about the meeting at Tommaso's and how when she tried to peek into the back area, she bumped into Paul Castellano knocking the cigar out of his mouth. Tony Lucic even took the stand to avoid jail time at 68. Lucic testified that Jimmy shot and killed Ricky Tassiello in 1978. He said that Jimmy dismembered Tassiello's body, dumped it in the East River, but kept his hands frozen in the freezer to use later. Jimmy's plan was to kill someone and then put Tassiello's fingerprints on the gun to throw off investigators. Tony told the jury he didn't know if Jimmy ever carried out this plan, but he went on to testify that he saw Eddie Comiskey and Jimmy drink pig's blood, and he was afraid that Jimmy was going to kill him. On February 28, 1988, the jury found Jimmy and all but John Halo guilty. On May 12, 1988, Jimmy Coonan was sentenced to 75 years in jail with a suggestion of no parole and a $1 million fine. Edna Coonan was sentenced to 15 years and fined $200,000. Jimmy McElroy was sentenced to 60 years. Billy Boken, 50 years. Muggsy Ritter and Tommy Collins received 40 years, and Tommy's wife received a 6-month sentence. Kevin Kelly would turn himself in August 1988. In the spring of '89, he would be found guilty of 2 murders, a murder conspiracy, narcotics trafficking, extortion, loan sharking, and racketeering. In 1990, he would be sentenced to 40 years. He would be released in 2011. Billy Boken was released in 2001. Jimmy McElroy will become an informant for the government in 1993, and he died in 2011. Muggsy Ritter will be released in 2008. Mickey Featherstone and his family went into the witness protection program and have been living under new names since. Jimmy Coonan is still behind bars. He's 77 as of March of 24. Jimmy has a full-term date of November 17, 2061, and a mandatory release date of June 1st, 2030. During my research, some sources said that the gang is still active in the streets of Hell's Kitchen, and Jackie Coonan, who died in 1988's son, Jackie Jr., is running things. But one comment under the post from a bartender in Hell's Kitchen today said, "The Westies are done. And if Jackie Jr. is running the neighborhood, then tell him I want my $20 back I loaned him the other day for cab fare." And that, my friends, is the skinny on the Westies. I hope you guys enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed telling it. If you guys want to read more about the Westies, I recommend finding a copy of the Westies book by T.J. English. I read it back in 1990 when it came out, and it's one of my favorite books. And it's really the only book on the subject out there, and it's a great read. So, remember, hit that join button to become a full-fledged made guy or a gal. Bump off that subscribe button, break that thumb, ring that bell, set it for all notifications, check the merch store, and I think we're going to head back to Chicago next. I found some good stuff on a couple of mugs out there. I think we'll make a good story. All right, so this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I'll see you in the funnies.